The following is an Operation Podcast production. Alone. Climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
Without oxygen.
Yeah. The sun starts to come up and I got to the summit and then I was just alone. This realization that like literally my brain, my person, my organic figure was the highest point on the planet. I've come to the highest place on the planet in a very, very difficult way, the hardest way I can imagine. And there's no place else I can go to get away from myself.
I mean, this is you facing, at this moment, certain death. Mm-hmm. You're this expeditionist, you're climbing the world's tallest mountains, and now here you are, stuck in this kind of like avalanche, this snowstorm, and you're like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
You really seem to share how to become good at suffering.
I think this is one of the problems with so many of these tales, these narratives of our abuse, is that oftentimes we negate how we feed into them. Diagnosed bipolar 2 when I was 15, so there was this narrative of brokenness and this idea of I was gonna go crazy. In order to escape madness, I will live madly. What's up, everybody? I'm Cory Richards, author of The Color of Everything. I'm here on Ever Forward Radio.
I think you started off great in your book with this quote from, am I pronouncing the name Rainier?
Rilke. Everybody will just,
Rilke.
Rilke. We'll
Shout
just
out
say
Rilke.
Yeah.
You got this amazing quote
Yeah.
that you kick off the book with that I would like to use in conjunction with asking you the question
Yeah.
of Ever Forward. Quote, let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror, just keep going. No feeling is final.
Yeah.
I want to use that and then ask you, Ever Forward, what do those two words mean to you?
Well, I think it's just constant evolution, but also there's so much in moving ever forward. To me, you can't not be, but you can always make the choice to try to stay the same. And I think people really fight hard. People try so hard to stay the same. We become committed to our suffering or committed to whatever it is that even if it's maladaptive, it's comfortable. So we choose to stay in that. So ever forward is, in essence, the reality of all things. It's living, but at the same time, so many of us fight it because it's comfortable where we are, even if it's uncomfortable.
Man, what a immediate perspective shift that I think a lot of us would agree. For me to change, for me to want more, for me to do more, be more, have more, I have to make a choice. I have to make a series of choices. And in order to move my life forward, that takes consecutive choices, but also to stay the same. That's a choice.
That is, there's a Taoist concept called Wu Wei, which is action through non-action. Ooh. So the choice to stay, the choice to do nothing is still a choice, exactly to your point. And it's not always bad. In fact, sometimes choosing to not act can be the most prudent choice. But when we talk about transformation and we talk about change, so often we think of constant action. So ever forward would for so many people imply a constant choice of action. Mm-hmm. Because there's also the narrative that to act is inspiration follows action or motivation follows action. And yet I think there's real value sometimes in reconciling the idea that sometimes the quietude of choosing not to act is actually a large step forward. Yeah. So
you're describing my exact current season of life.
Me too. That's why I can articulate it. So maybe it's just a rationalization
I'm so
for
glad
where
to hear
I
this.
am. Yeah.
This kind of concept came to mind after going through your book and getting to know you more. And it's that you really seem to share how to become good at suffering.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. I would agree that suffering was, for me, for a long time, part of my identity. And so there was, I think there's a skill to endurance, but I think suffering is something different. I chose to suffer versus choosing to endure mindfully, right? So the suffering is sort of the suffering is, what's that saying? Pain is optional, or pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, or something like that. Yeah.
Or kind of like the Stoic, I believe it's Seneca, we suffer far more in imagination than in reality.
Exactly. But I think for a long time, and certainly through the narrative that's described in the book, there was this idea that in order to almost be valuable, I had to validate my endurance through suffering. And I also had a very entrenched story of suffering, where I thought, again, to Seneca's point, I thought that by suffering and creating that internal suffering in some ways, I was somehow stronger. When in fact, I think the real strength and the point of this whole conversation and the point of this whole podcast, your whole platform is to move beyond that, or to move through it, I guess.
Move through it, absolutely. Yeah. To just kind of take the listener there. I mean, this is you facing at this moment certain death. You're this expeditionist, you're climbing the world's tallest mountains, and now here you are stuck in this kind of like avalanche, this snowstorm, and you're like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. And so kind of this at the end moment, you go, quote, "They'll find my body in the spring when my orange down suit emerges from the melting snow and feathers float from the tears. After months of uncertainty, mom and dad will finally have closure, and all the fights and fuss and anger we endured together will seem silly compared to my death. I wonder if my eyes will be open or close, and if they will still be blue." At this moment of your impending doom, facing certain death, you thought about your parents and the years of all the fighting, and you thought maybe that will melt away, just kind of like I will. Or the snow that's going to melt away to define me, or they'll find me, and then that might melt away the years of all this pain and suffering. Why them? And now, clearly you made it out.
Yeah.
Has that winter thawed?
Wow. What a good question. I love coming on podcasts where people have put deep thought into that's fabulous.
Brought to you by Ketone IQ.
Yeah. It already worked. So, I mean, look, our families are, whether or not we like them, whether we disown them, whether we leave them behind, or whether they're our closest allies, our families they're our blood. They are literally our genetic imprint. They are our pathway into existence. And if you think of everything that's happened before you over 13.8 billion years, and all of those ancestors that could have gone left, but they went right. And had they gone left, they might have died, right? Think of that entire family tree, right? So when I was in this avalanche, we're on the side of a mountain called Gasherbrum 2. It's the middle of winter. We've done the first winter ascent. It's the 13th highest mountain in the world. We get hit by this avalanche. Everything that I am and everything that I perceive comes through a family lens. It has to, right? Because that's where I learned all my stories. That's where I learned who I was. That's how I formed myself. And I thought of my parents, I thought of my family, I thought of a lot of random different shit. But certainly thinking about dying and dying before my parents, which I know to be one of the greatest pains, at least I'm told. I wondered about, how will this impact them? And I think also there is some revisionist history in this because it all happened so fast, right? The thoughts are not this, for me, they were not this linear line of poetry, but there was this anger, there was this curiosity, there was resentment and regret. And then it was like, does anything that felt so gravitational, so important, and so worthy of conflict, is any of that going to matter when I die right now? And the answer is no. I mean, we see it all the time. When people pass on, we are more capable of just letting go of our tightly held stories, and we just let them be fully human. And there's no more blame because there's no more, you can't place the blame anymore. There's no place for it to go. So often we let it go. And to answer your second question, absolutely. In the years since this, it's been almost, it'll be 2011. It'll be 14 years in February. Yeah, I mean, everything's changed. Part of that is my dad now moving towards his death. Part of it is my mom and I really reconciling a lot of our relationship through a number of different cool modalities. But that winter has thawed. What a great way to put it too. What a beautiful way to say that.
I thought it worked.
Yeah,
I thought it worked well.
You should write a book. Yeah.
Working on it.
Working on it.
A follow-up question there. So there you are thinking you are about to die at the top of this mountain. You said maybe there were some like random things that came to mind.
Yeah.
You think you're about to die. What was one of the most random thoughts, memories, feelings that came at that moment? Clearly it mattered, or else maybe your conscious or subconscious wouldn't have shown it to you.
I mean, truly, I thought about, and it says it in the book, I thought about Cheerios. Like I thought about breakfast cereal. I thought about parking tickets. I thought about just shit that, you know what I thought about a lot was things that felt unresolved. And
like unfinished business?
Unfinished business, but it wasn't as if it was like, I don't like the word regret. I know I used it earlier. I don't really like the word regret because it implies something. It's a very specific story. But I just thought about unresolved things. And there was a tension between, this finality, which means I don't get to resolve something, and the desire to resolve it. And there's sort of a twist on that in the book towards the end where I talk about, I actually don't think resolution really exists, at least not emotionally. I think we come to, if you want to talk about ever forward, I think part of that is acceptance. And I think,
absolutely,
acceptance resolution is all up in your head. Acceptance is stuff that happens in your heart. And we might not get the result that we ultimately want, but if you can accept simply what is, the need for resolution just evaporates.
Ooh, man, that was good. That's a clip right there. I like that. You, in the early part of your story and early part of the book, you did something that I think a lot of us can relate to, or at least have heard about or thought about, and that's running away.
Yeah.
You did what a lot of kids attempt, but actually succeeded at, and you ran away from home.
Yeah.
You were 15, 16?
I was 50. I ran away 3 times. I was in this psychiatric sort of long-term behavioral rehab for troubled teens called Lifeline. And I was there for 8 months. It was 12 hours a day of group therapy. It was like, it was all with the best intentions in coming out in the worst ways. And I think, there's another conversation about how we treat troubled teens that's worthy of looking at. But yeah, I ran away 3 times. And finally, my parents were just like, no, like you can't come. They laid down a line, which I think is really beautiful in some ways, because they chose the preservation of their own relationship, knowing that if they held on to that, I was more likely to come around because it gave them an anchor. But in order for them to create that situation, they also had to cut me loose.
What do you think was more scary? Was it being out on your own as a teenager, or staying home in that situation?
Oh, God, dude. Killer. Like, amazing questions. Nobody's, wow.
It's like almost choosing the lesser of two evils, right? I'm sure that I can't imagine. I've never been there, but truly 2 horrible, shitty choices that are both probably terrifying.
Well, terrifying, like, actually, I would choose being on the run. Because as scary as it was, and there's some real darkness in the book, there's a chapter where I end up, squatting in this guy's house, and it has a million different interpretations. And I think it's really hard for some people to read, chapter 8. But being on the run was exciting, right? I was in control. I mean, to a certain degree, I was in control. And I So in that way, there was this excitement, there was a stimulation, and nobody was telling me what to do or where to be or how to be or what I was or what I wasn't.
Which every teenager, that's like every teenager's wet dream.
Right. There was a freedom to it.
This coming of age and freedom.
Yeah, there was a very, and I could craft my own story, and I certainly chose the story of I'm the victim, here I am, this poor kid who's been, cast out into the wilderness. And so I would choose that because living at home at the time was scary for a number of reasons. It was much scarier to be there. And it was largely because of the relationship I had with my brother, who, by the way, is a marvelous human being. And I extend more gratitude to him than anybody else in my life, because for as difficult as that relationship was, it was because of him. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. It was because of him and because of our relationship that I decided to look into all of this. It was because of how hard that was that and the residue of it that I decided that, I wanted to really investigate who I was and how we become who we are. So I think of my brother as my greatest guide. But yeah, I would 100% choose at that time to be on the run.
What was, if you can kind of unpack a little bit for us, that relationship with your brother?
It was violent at the time. When we were young, we had a beautiful sort of tender relationship. He was the older brother. He was very kind. But something, and I think these seeds were planted very, very young. And I think it might have been the result of sort of insecure attachments that came from potentially postpartum depression and these ideas of these emotional deficits or these emotional needs not getting met in very, very subtle ways. My parents were marvelous. They did everything they could, and yet still we ended up in this very fucked up situation. So it's a cautionary tale about parenting in general, but the relationship between my brother developed into something that was very, very violent. And we learned that, and it was rage-filled. I think there's a very big difference between brothers kicking the shit out of each other because they're brothers, which I think is fairly normal. Fists are thrown.
Been
right?
There,
yeah.
I'm sure my brother can attest.
We throw each other around. There's some bloody noses. There's some whatever. But most of the time, those relationships repair. The difference between my brother and I was there was this deep rage, and I don't know where that came from. And it was scary. I would say that was, if we use the word trauma, I would say that the more traumatic element was not the physical violence, but the emotional violence, the rage that drove it. That's what scared me. And that's, of course, the physical violence was also pronounced, but I also take a lot of ownership in that, because just as he learned that by picking a fight, or by exerting physical violence, he got attention. I learned that if I got the shit kicked out of me, I got attention. And so we were both vying for our emotional needs to be met.
It's this toxic relationship.
It's a toxic relationship.
That you didn't ask for, but
right, but
you're recognizing you're getting something out of.
For sure. And I think this is one of the problems with so many of these tales, these narratives of our abuse, is that oftentimes we negate how we feed into them. And it's really hard to do.
Who wants to admit that? Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not to say that everybody is feeding into it at all. I'm not suggesting that. And I'm not saying that every person who has been in an abusive relationship is in any way responsible. All I'm saying is that I can take that ownership and say, as scary as it was, and I didn't understand that at the time, but certainly in retrospect, I can see that at least on some level, I was like, well, this works for me too. Because
at some point, you have to recognize the bitter truth here is that I'm a player on the field as well.
100%. And there's real freedom, ever forward. I think one of the largest steps forward I've ever taken was when I switched from life is happening to me to taking full, radical responsibility for every single thing in my life. And that is incredibly challenging. And I still work on it, especially in my relationship, the leap that it takes to take responsibility for not necessarily the fight that I get in with my significant other, but for creating the container that would allow the fight to exist.
Ooh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
That is a huge shift. And talk about, making a leap forward in our interaction with the world. That has been a huge one for me. But that extends to every single corner of my life. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that I'm that I'm in any way like, oh, I'm so powerful. That's not it at all. It's just to say that within any circumstance, finding my ownership in it and being accountable to it and taking full agency in that moment, that's a huge shift.
I don't know why this car analogy popped in mind, but you're describing this container where maybe, obstacles and friction and arguments, but also love and a lot of other things, they all have to have the same contributing factors in order for them to come out. And it makes me think of, a combustion engine. The factors have to be just right in that container for all of that shit to fire that can keep you sitting there or can also propel you forward.
Right, exactly.
The container matters.
The container absolutely matters, and how you build it matters. And like we talked about earlier, we're always moving forward, but the container we're moving forward in is entirely our responsibility, right? You can just get pushed through life, or you can say, okay, I'm going to take full responsibility. I mean, when I was in AA and I was sober for 6 years, I'm no longer sober. That's something to talk about. I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. But one of the things that I really took from the rooms was stay on your side of the street. And I think so often we try to outsource our pain, or we try to, we outsource the cause of it. We try to blame, when in fact, it might actually be totally relevant. It might actually have happened to you from an external source, but blaming somebody actually doesn't do shit. It just keeps you trapped in it. It just keeps you tethered to it, right? And so you're not, you might be trying to move forward, but you're actually chained to the past, psychically and otherwise, where you're just dragging that along. Blame is just dragging. And it's very different to be like, I don't blame somebody, and then embody that. But that's a journey that you can have the words, but until you feel it, you'll feel when the chain breaks.
Dude, yeah, it's like you're reading out of my journal. Up until like a couple of years ago, this mantra, these words, ever forward, came from my dad, and it was his life mantra. And when he passed in 2005, this turned into something because of that. Mm-hmm. I thought, I'm going to take this, I'm going to move forward for the sake of moving forward. But I've used this analogy before, and it's so perfect. All I was doing was just adding another link on a chain, without realizing that chain is still connected to this immovable object in the past. Yeah. And I can get a lot of distance between me and it. Right. But where am I really going? More importantly, why am I even moving? Is going forward the right thing for me right now? Yeah. And until I kind of had that realization of taking total ownership and choosing to stay put so that I can make the best next calculated step forward. Right. Man, I unhooked myself from that chain, and it's great. I know all that stuff is there in the past, and it's not like, oh, I've moved on, I forgot about it, but you're free from it. Yeah. You're free from it, and you can go back to it whenever you want to now, but you're no longer chained to it. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful analogy. And sometimes moving forward means stopping, turning around, and taking the chain apart link by link, right? Yeah. And then inevitably you realize that it's actually not chained to anything. It's just, you get to that last link. There's no boulder there. There might be bigger links, but it's not chained to anything. It's just a prisoner of our own mind. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Damn, another quote you have in there is, am I cause or effect? And kind of still in, this part of your story of the situation at home. I think this is such a really powerful question that a lot of children or now adults of broken homes or even physical emotional abuse might find themselves asking. So am I cause or effect for the less than ideal situation at home? Where do you land on that now? I mean, yes and. I am, look, children, no child asked, well, maybe on some cosmic level that I haven't unwound yet, and maybe I don't even want to, but I will say
cognitively, no child asked to be here, right? That is not a choice that we necessarily made. Certainly on some back level, infinite, okay, I'll make space for that. But just for the sake of this conversation, no child asked to be here. So we are given this opportunity at life, and yet our cognitive ability to understand the totality of it when we're that young, we're still in a very cause and effect state of mind. In fact, that's how we're learning. I do this, this happens. And in its full discovery. But when I was talking about the relationship at home, I was so curious, like, am I causing this or am I just the effect of it? And I don't know if that really makes sense, but, or what is the effect? Or am I the effect too? Like, am I causing and affecting everything? Or, what is the effect?
Does either matter?
But that's the bigger point, is that the attempt to unwind it is more this attempt to make sense of it. But in hindsight, I can see it doesn't really matter. It was just what was. It's just what was. And we want to know. And I think this is one of the limitations of psychology and therapy sometimes, is that we get stuck in the story. We get stuck in trying to unwind and unravel the whys and the hows and whodunit of our psychology, right? Of the way we work and how the mechanisms of our mind and our heart. But at some point, that is just, it's inconsequential until, at least I found for me, that it was when I was like, okay, I know all I can fucking know about the mechanisms of, early childhood development. And, I could write a dissertation on this shit. At some point, it didn't matter anymore. It just didn't matter, because the reality is these are the ways in which I behave. My understanding of why is useful only insofar as that I can frame any behavior in that context and then say, yeah, but that is not the current context, right?
Yeah. It makes me think of, I've been in this situation in various different ways. And it's almost like this humbling acceptance that to your point, it just is.
Yeah, it just is.
And I am not yet at a point in my understanding, in my fathoming, in my perspective, in my ego, and whatever, to really be able to understand why or how or where to go from here. But when I could just accept the situation, that is what put me on the path to getting to all those other places.
Right. And that's sort of the conversation about agency in some ways.
Absolutely.
It's just like you just accept what is. That is taking responsibility. Now you can choose to stay stuck in it, poor me, or you can choose to move with it and through it, or you can choose to run from it, which is ultimately staying stuck in it.
Mm-hmm. You can fight the river or go downstream with it.
Exactly. It's so much easier to go downstream. That I've used this analogy before too, where something happens and you're like, okay, so I'm driving, somebody's texting, they run a stop sign, they T-bone me, right? It's not my fault. I was following the rules. I was driving the speed limit. I was looking both ways, but they were not paying attention and they T-boned me. Well, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. So the idea of victimhood and staying stuck in what happened to us is that of, well, now I'm just going to drive around in a shitty car and complain about it. Or you can take all the insurance information, you drive to the shop, you get it towed, you get your car fixed or it gets totaled and you get a new one. Like, it is your responsibility to deal with the situation, no matter what happened. And that's so fucking hard, because it actually kind of feels good to drive around in a shitty car and complain about it and tell everybody about your train wreck. You know, it feels good because it fosters a certain sense of sympathy. Mm-hmm. But that sympathy actually wears out. It has, sure, for a week, people are like, oh, bummer. For a month, they're like, oh, bummer. After a year, they're like, dude, get your fucking car fixed, you know?
Square your shit away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so true. Just because you think, and this might not necessarily be the truth, but because you think it is not your fault does not take away that it is your responsibility. Exactly.
And the truth is that's true. I mean, we're obviously using this in the context of trauma and the things that happen to us. You can still be angry. You can still be angry that somebody, but even that kind of, it's really kind of useless.
Such a waste of energy. It truly is. It truly is.
Yeah.
So it was kind of during this time in your story where you began to really kind of get outside, literally more outside of your body, of your mind, outdoors. And you talk about how, quote, nature is the only reprieve I get from my hyperactive brain. What is it about nature that is so therapeutic for you? And I'll say for the collective us.
Well, I mean, we are nature. Right. So we've built a structure and a society that keeps us sort of feeling separate from nature, what we call nature. But when you zoom out, all of this is natural. I know people are like, you know, the forest is natural and the way the earth evolved is natural. Okay, yes, and we are of the earth. And so everything that we do is natural. We are a natural species operating in a natural way on a natural planet. We can't actually be outside of nature. What I'm referring to in this case is that more finite definition of nature. When we go out and we connect with the planet in its more organic form, there is a cellular resonance that has a calming effect on our bodies. It helps regulate our nervous system. And quite often it takes us out of our mind or allows us to work through whatever is cluttering our mind. So the movement, oftentimes we're moving in nature, right? So when we're moving, we're helping sort of declutter. When we're sitting, we are, I think, very much connecting on a more cellular level. And both would be true if you're moving too, but there's something about the quiet of sitting in nature that has a profound calming effect on our nervous system and can help us step out of our sympathetic nervous system and back into our parasympathetic, where we're regulating. And there's plenty of research that shows, even, you know, there was one thing where it showed just showing inmates in solitary confinement pictures of nature, helped downregulate their sort of anxiety about that isolation. I mean, it made them feel more connected. So I think there's also something to feeling connected to a larger whole. And in my case specifically, the activities that we were doing outside, skiing, climbing, they demand a certain level of flow. I don't want to, you know, I think presence is something much bigger than flow. I think, you know, mindfulness, presence, and flow are sort of different things, but they're all interrelated. You can't get to flow
without presence,
right?
I would say.
Well, I would say presence is the ultimate everything, right? That's how I view it. But I understand what you're saying too. I would say flow is a pathway to presence, potentially.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not an awareness of the totality of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like same but different.
Exactly. Yeah, so maybe it's semantics. Yeah.
Just a matter of perspective.
Right. So, but if you're skiing, I'm 9 years old and we were good skiers, and you're going 40 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour, you have to be very, very present, or you have to be very mindful. Yeah. You have to be in some level of flow. So by virtue of that chaos of my head, that loud sort of noise of jumping from thought to thought to thought to thought to thought just became singular. And so it was actually like a rest.
Ooh. Which I'm sure came at a time where you cannot appreciate that more.
Exactly. And so what I also learned is that by being in nature, you step outside of the demands of belonging, because you just belong. We just belong in nature, right? And so the identity and the structure of that identity, it gave me a place of belonging, because it was so elemental. Now, conversely, spinning forward, all that outdoor activity, as I certainly moved into like being a professional climber, became my identity. So it actually started to work in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I want to get there next, but before I do, can you like set the stage for us? This is not just some guy who loves nature and get outs and
right.
He's not climbing mountains for fun. I mean, Cory, you're an extremely world-renowned, accomplished climber, adventurous, expeditionist. Your work and even we've seen on covers of magazines, National Geographic. So please paint the picture of this professional outdoorsman for us.
Yeah. So, I mean, and this happened, I was in psychiatric units. I was on the street. I was, bouncing around back in psychiatric. Like the adolescence was a mess, and it's really detailed pretty heavily in the book. And there was ultimately this decision that I made, and it was pretty much, I would say it's unconscious or subconscious, where I was like, fuck it. Because of the chaos of my childhood, I was very adept at navigating hyper-stimulating and chaotic environments. And so I gravitated towards them because it's what I knew, right? I learned to navigate chaos really, really well.
But now the chaos is my choice.
But see, that was the whole thing. It's like, well, if I'm good at that, now I'm going to do it, right? And there was also this narrative of I was diagnosed bipolar 2 when I was 15. So there was this narrative of brokenness and this idea of I was going to go crazy. At any given moment, I was going to, if I didn't take these pills, if I didn't do this stuff, I was going to go crazy. And so there was like a crystallizing moment. And again, I only really understand it now, but where I was like, and I say it in the book, I'm going to risk my life in order to save it. So
please rewind or go back, say that again, man.
I'm going to risk my life in order to save it. Meaning that my life is fucked, but what I'm really good at is risking my life. So by doing that, I can generate notoriety. I can generate a place where I belong. I can stamp my mark in the world. So I'm going to go do this risky stuff in order to save my life from absolute despair. And I'm going to, in order to escape madness, I will live madly. And it was reflexive. And again, this is like, it's meaning making in hindsight. And I see that. It's the creation of a story, and it's a good one. But also I understand that what it really is a framework to help me understand why I was trying to make the decisions I was making.
Sure.
And so, yeah, and I jumped into that world, and I jumped headlong into that world, and I took my camera with me. I never was like, I want to be a photographer. That never crossed my mind until I started taking pictures. And then it snowballed, and it just got bigger and bigger, bigger, better, faster, more, bigger, better, faster, more, bigger expeditions. And this is coming out of that adolescent period where I really rediscovered climbing, and in that moment discovered photography, which gave me an anchor that kind of helped pull me out of that fuck show of adolescence.
Well, yeah. I mean, what comes to mind for me in that is, to your point, you grew up in chaos, and so I'm going to choose my own chaos now.
Right.
But even literally, I'm going to show the world this chaos through the lens of my choice.
Right, exactly.
If that is not the most accepting of a shitty situation and taking ownership and command of it all at the same time, and whether you realize this consciously at the time or not, but that's what you've done.
Well, it's certainly, it's a beautiful understanding of it now, and it's a story I choose. And I look back on it and I think, oh man, you look at how I was telling these stories. I mean, the allegory of climbing is as old as time. And it's the allegory of struggle, right? And so really, I think what I was, and the pictures I was always most interested in making was when shit went wrong. I was pretty uninterested in creating the beautiful, I made some cool, beautiful pictures of climbing, but the stuff that really, really was exciting to me is when something went completely sideways. You're in a storm, you're looking at somebody suffering, because to me, that's what I was trying to, that's what resonated most. And that's what I was trying to tell my story through these pictures. And then it got bigger than climbing. But for a while, yes, I was a professional. For 20 years, I climbed pretty much professionally.
Take us to that moment. You talk about this in the book about, I believe you were in Austria.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going through your first real photography, experience class. And can you tell us what this instructor told you to do? And this experience of just going out, you were in the woods for a couple of days, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, he gave you this objective of what he wanted you to do in photography. And walk us through the struggle of the understanding you had with that objective, how you actually executed on it, and when you kind of realized what had happened, like pun intended, what clicked for you?
Yeah. Well, what clicked in what way? With the photography assignment? Yeah. So I was studying under a guy named Andrew Phelps in Salzburg, Austria. And, I had decided to go study abroad. I'd gotten back, after dropping out, I'd gotten back into school, at least briefly, and I decided to go study in this place in Austria. And I showed Andrew my pictures, and he was like, I think there's something here. But the assignment was basically, I want you to go out and walk around the Monksberg, which is like this mountain that rises in the middle of town. And it's not really a mountain, but it's a big, big hill. And I just want you to take pictures of the mundane. He's like, I want you to see what you're a part of. And the idea was that to that point, all of my photography was very reactionary, meaning I'm in hyper-stimulating environments, photographing extraordinary landscapes and people doing these crazy things in these landscapes. And what he was advocating for was like, I don't want you to react to the world. I want you to respond to it. I don't want you to catch a moment. I want you to make it. I don't want you to speak for the world. I want it to speak through you, right? Stop trying to, and I think I use these words in the book, like stop thrusting yourself upon it. And so I went onto this mountain that was, it's very monk-like because that's actually where the Benedictine monks settled this town essentially. And it was one of the first structures. And I walked around and I just looked at like piles of sticks and I tried to find beauty in like piles of sticks and these little structures that maybe kids had made and like just, a fence post. And really what he was trying to do is again, get me to quiet the mind, right? To quiet myself, to be articulate with what I wanted to say and to put real intention and mindfulness towards it. And it clicked then. I think I conceptually understood it and I kind of did it. It did take years and years for me to fully get it. The irony of that is that when I really got it, when I really, really understood what he was asking of me, it only happened after I stopped taking pictures altogether.
How so?
Well, I was looking. I was constantly seeing the world through a viewfinder, whether I had the camera to my eye or not. I was looking at elements, light, all of this stuff. And I basically learned how to view the world through a viewfinder. Again, whether it was to my eye or not, I was always looking. And so I was pulling it apart. But when I finally put the camera down, and this happened only 3 years ago, I put it down, I set it down. All of a sudden, the totality of things, because I was no longer looking at the elements, kind of came crashing down on me and I saw, oh my God, this is how marvelous is this? Like everything, I can finally see it. So sort of the line there is that it was only when I stopped looking that I finally started to see. But that's what that assignment was all about.
That's beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me, I think it's Ram Dass. There's this quote that I have in kind of like a meditation, psychedelic chill playlist.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's when you quiet the mind, you open the heart.
Yeah. When you quiet the mind, you open the eyes, And photography, so often people think, oh, it's this act of presence. And I never experienced that at all. It was a very mindful, mindful. I was using my mind quite a lot.
Right. Yeah. I think most people would think that.
Yeah. But they're like, oh, you're present with the moment. For me, absolutely not. I'm lining things up. I'm calculating. Again, it's an act of flow, creative flow potentially, but it wasn't an act of presence. It's only when you put the viewfinder down entirely that you see what's the totality of what you're looking at,
Yeah, I kind of personally, I feel like I'm in an opposite situation, an opposite phase right now. Up until the last 3 years, I have been the bigger picture. And in many ways I still am, but very big picture. And this is going to sound stupid, but up until...
That's a story.
So here's just what it is.
Yeah.
So up until, I kind of expanding, my business, and we're opening, I'm designing and building these different podcast studios. And I now, Cory, I shit you not, I cannot go throughout my day and not see anywhere I go as a set.
Right.
In someone's living room, in a den, we're just in New York this past weekend.
Right.
I'm looking in the shop, the windows, I'm looking at furniture stores, I'm looking at just random moments, just fleeting moments. And I'm like, oh, this would look really good on camera, or oh, I love this shape of a table next to that color of a couch.
Right.
I'm kind of, I don't know, going into my design era, I guess, but it's just unique. I feel like I'm kind of flipped where you are. Yeah,
but I think that's beautiful and natural. And I think when you're passionate about something, naturally you're going to see the world through that lens, no pun intended. That's what we do. I think I'm not even necessarily, well, what I would say is what I experienced and what I would advocate for is to take a moment to step one step further back when you're in that moment of oh, that'd be such a cool, set, or, oh, this would be a great photograph. Even if you take the photograph or buy the table, whatever the fuck it happens to be, just noticing what you're doing in the moment. Oh, wow, I'm viewing this as a set. And it's just it's like that one step further back. You know what I mean?
So true. And it does. I do also kind of have this very top of mind moment of presence, and I'm here, I'm very mindful, and I'm very still, which are all other things that I'm after in my life as well. And so I kind of have this extra layer to it. And I'm deeply appreciative for my ability. At first it might catch me as, oh, this would be a good set, or this would look good on video or something. But I just have this deep appreciation for the moment. Yeah. And I have these little moments all day long of this color and this shape and this person and this aroma and
how beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I can kind of extract these little essences of it to bring into my own world.
And I think what happened for me is, in some ways, I just got stuck in seeing the world that way. It's not that it was bad. It was just that's how I was living. Bad, good, bad. That's sort of a value application, right? It's just how I was living. And then I started living another way, and it felt more expansive. That's all. But I think to your point, seeing how a color interacts or something like that and being mindful of it, that is presence. You're just that's cool,
I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, kind of getting more into your journey now, you're out on your own, you're picking up the camera, you're exploring the world, you're climbing, mountain after mountain, trail after trail. I'm curious, what life lesson do you feel you have taken with you to the top of the mountain that served you the most? And what is maybe a lesson you took off of the mountain that has worked best for you back in life?
Well, simple, very simple lesson about getting to the top is that it does not happen all at once. It is truly, the metaphor is ridiculous, but it's one step at a time, literally one step at a time, one day at a time. We hear it all the time, but that's what it is. It happens in small chunks. When you break down climbing a mountain, that's all it is. It is one move at a time, and there's an element of planning, but that in and of itself is you're already in the process of climbing the mountain. So, look, having a good plan is essential. Knowing what you're doing. And knowing at what point you have to let go to the mystery of the experience and being comfortable with that, that's a skill. But all things happen in incremental steps. Rome was not built in a day. The mountain was not climbed in a leap. We too often tell the story that, and then I was there. We tell the summit story. And I think it's a disservice to talk about the great epiphany of the summit. What I say in the book is this is sort of maybe what I brought down. Well, there's two things. Only the summit can illuminate its own insignificance. So we say it doesn't matter, but you kind of have to get there to understand that it doesn't matter.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like you have to, but the other thing that I realized, in 2016, I climbed Everest without oxygen. Climbed Everest in 2016 without oxygen. My partner turned around. I climbed. So now I'm alone, climbing through the night. And it's not like one of those days where you see like the Skittle lineup, where you're just surrounded by people. I was the only one around. I think there were maybe five other climbers on this summit day, that day, and we were climbing from the north side, so from the Tibetan side. And my partner decided to turn around, and I just remember this moment of sitting, I forget the feature, but it's like this very specific rock. It looks like sort of like a mushroom. It might even be called mushroom rock. On the summit ridge of Everest, or just below where you get on the actual summit ridge. And it's just silent. Like the radio goes silent. And I'm sitting there alone. And I just hear my breathing and I'm just listening to this thing that is my organism surviving in a place that it has no business, and making the decision that I'm going to keep going, because I was ahead of him already at that point. And so the radio crackle dies and I just keep going. And it was fucking marvelous. It was so, so special. This quiet, I'm in darkness, and then the sun you start to get the light starts to come, and you start to see more shapes, and then there's some gruesome aspects of it where you're stepping literally over bodies, and you see different body parts sticking out of these rocks, and it's very, very surreal. And then the sun starts to come up, and I got to the summit just after sunrise, and I passed this really lovely, I think she's Swedish or Norwegian climber, on her way down with her climbing partner, who's a Sherpa guy. And then I was just alone on the summit, like literally nobody else there. It was just so rare. And it wasn't perfect weather, but it was calm. And it was so, so stunning. And this realization that like literally my brain, my person, my organic figure was the highest point on the planet. And this, like, it's weird, right? Like, it's very strange. Like, my mind,
to say the least,
my mind is the highest organic matter on the planet. And
not only, and the only one.
And the only one. There's nobody else around. There's nobody else coming up or down. Like, I am literally alone. And I realized, and maybe I realized in hindsight, I think subconsciously there was a recognition. And again, this is meaning making and storytelling, but it's a worthy story to tell. There was, I think, a subtle knowing that, oh fuck, I've come to the highest place on the planet in a very, very difficult way, the hardest way I can imagine, and there's no place else I can go to get away from myself. There's nothing else. Like, I can just keep doing this, but it will.
You had this thought at that moment, not reflecting on it later?
No, I really had. I mean, I think there was some subtle recognition of it at the moment, but really it came later that I was like, oh fuck, I had completely exhausted everything. There was nothing I could do that was going to get me away from the what I felt inside. And, like I said, I've told this story before, so that's why I check in with it and I close my eyes and I try to put myself there. But it was shocking, and maybe I'm making it up. I make space for that, but I think my heart broke a little.
How so?
Because what else? Oh shit! what else do I do? You know, like what else do I thought I would matter if I did this, you know?
Wow.
And I don't. I don't matter because I climbed a mountain. Like and it's sort of like what a silly thought to begin with.
No, man, like hand to God. Like I've not climbed Everest, but in any situation where I could even in the smallest way relate to, like I am at the peak of this experience of expansion of what I'm capable of body, mind, soul. Has always been met pretty immediately with, I am so insignificant. I am so meaningless. Like how silly of me to think that I could keep going and keep running and keep expanding and getting to this next level. It's like the higher up you go, you realize like I'm fine down here.
Yeah.
All the work is actually down here.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, and we've talked a little bit about like the psychedelic space, but
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You know, there's the old adage of, you know, once you get the message, hang up the phone. I like to say, you don't have to go to space to see the stars, you know, like you can. And in fact, I've never experienced something so psychedelic as just walking around in daily life. There's nothing that I've experienced in a literal psychedelic space that has been as expansive and as mind-bending as waking up to the reality of what I'm already experiencing. And I think so often we get lost in sort of people, and I'm talking, you know, I have done a lot of psychedelic work primarily in a therapeutic sense, but like it's so fun and it's so like expansive that you think that's where all the work is, but that the work is not there. The work is the work is the integration. The work is the integration, and the work is in living. And like you can keep going back there, and that's fine. That's fine. Go back, have an experience. But for me, I've just started to see like the real experience is just like boom, it's just here. You know?
Speaking of, as someone who has spent the last 3-ish years now in semi-regular, and this year, because of the state of my mental health and things that have been coming up, I am back in very regular, not only therapy, but ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and just at-home ketamine therapy. And so I could go on and on forever about it and talk about the profound benefits that it has had on my mental health and just awakening to a lot of different things. But what was it about psychedelic therapy that attracted you as this could be a potential solution or is, in my mind, a valuable part of the work that I want to commit to on myself?
Well, I think you mentioned an interesting word there that I don't think there's a solution. And I know you weren't saying it that way, but I think a lot of people think of psychedelics as this panacea. And I think it can be very, very helpful. It certainly has been for me. I also see a lot of people or observe it, and maybe this is my own judgment, make space for that too. But people they do it and then they create a new story about whatever they experienced in that space. And then they hold on to that, which is, again, that's what the human mind does. We make meaning out of things. We tell stories about things.
We can't help it.
We can't help it. That's consciousness, right? Like we interpret data and apply a narrative to it, which creates meaning, and then that generates beliefs, right? So, and then we live and die by those beliefs. What attracted me to it was I was out of options. Something wasn't shifting. What I found in it was not what I thought. Ketamine for me, again, is that is my psychedelic drug of choice, and I'm fine calling it that. Like, you know, that's what has been the most generative for me, both as an interventional mood stabilizer, but also as a way to access altered levels of consciousness that aren't overwhelming. Does that make sense?
I totally understand. I also want to ask, what about creativity? For you? I know, how should I say this? I think an overlooked part of life and an overlooked part of mental health, commitment to your mental health that I personally experienced was the value of creativity. And I mean, we can look at, there's so much science that shows how ketamine, the neuroplasticity that we get is profound. You're getting parts of your brain to talk for the first time ever, for the first time in a long time. In a long time, you're getting this thing called neural crosstalk. We literally get our left and right hemispheres to begin to make connections, new connections. And then the level of creativity that I get anytime I come out of a ketamine therapy session, I can't write notes fast enough. I can't get ideas down fast enough. I can't, go watch a fantasy movie fast enough. It's just level of creativity that enhances so many other areas of my life, but I will also say has been profound and instrumental in my mental health healing. And it's kind of hard to really articulate, I think because it's so personal, the role of creativity in mental health. Can you relate at all? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
I totally understand what you're talking about. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to say about what it really has done for me is that it's connected me to my heart. And I don't want people to roll their eyes and get, oh my God. The heart is not a metaphor. The heart actually has a profound role in emotion processing. We have mirror neurons in our heart and our minds, like they are talking along the vagus nerve, like emotion processing starts in the heart, from what I understand.
The heart sends more neurochemical messages to the brain than it receives from the brain.
Right, exactly. So we're actually beginning a lot of our neural processing and our emotion processing in our heart, which is fascinating. So it connected me to that, like in a very real sense. And until people feel that, and I'm not saying you have to do it through psychedelics, it's really hard to relate to what I'm saying. So it put me back in touch with my heart. To that point, my sense is that art is a mostly heart-generated creation. So creativity, I think, predominantly comes from the heart and is interpreted through the mind. Now, maybe that's a little too philosophical for people, because certainly art feels very much like it is a mind act, but it sort of transcends the mind. Certainly, it comes through there.
Yeah, you're just like a conduit. I think you've asked any artist or any, true creative, I'm just a conduit for what is happening.
And it gets sort of structured in the mind, right?
Right, yeah.
So for me, in the psychedelic experience, whatever it happens to be, it by putting me more in touch with my heart, I'm actually more in touch with my creative center, right? And so whether or not it generates more creativity in me, I can't really say, because I'm not like you where I come out, I don't generally journal. I kind of just try to just reintegrate into the world. And I'm sort of just noticing more.
Absolutely.
So it's not to say that writing notes is in any way bad or good. It's just I'm just kind of like, maybe I should write more notes,
The first place I did ketamine-assisted psychotherapy was in this clinic, actually not far from here. And part of the process afterwards was access to journaling, painting.
Yeah.
Water. They had sand, that's cool. Like a Zen garden. And it was really wild, me and other patients, the creative outlets that we would gravitate towards. I mean, I used to paint in like middle school, high school. I wouldn't call myself a painter. I'm definitely not a Zen garden extraordinaire, but picking up a colored pencil or raking the Zen garden or just sitting in that environment where those things existed gave me this level of connection and appreciation of a creative side that I didn't fully know the depths of.
Well, I remember I came out of one and I just started drawing triangles. And just seeing how triangles fit together. And it was really a strange,
So you come out of the session and you're just like, I got to draw a triangle?
Yeah, basically, because I'd seen a lot of sort of geometrics in the experience. And I was just curious about how they fit together. And I was curious about symbology and different things that we've seen throughout the ages Pythagoras and Euclid, and I'm just like, Jesus, anyway. And that sounds a little heady for people, but I mean, to the mental health conversation, they have a really profound way of accessing deep parts of us that I think, once touched, can open up to healing. I think the danger of them, not danger, but one of the pitfalls is we get trapped in the story that we create in the psychedelic space, or we think that by understanding it, we somehow healed it. And the way I sort of phrase it in the book is like, you can have a dream that you made fire. You're like the original caveman and you rubbing the sticks together and poof, you made fire, right? And then you come out into real life and you think that you know how to make fire. And I'm like, yeah, we'll go rub some sticks together, because now you have
Shit ain't easy.
Yeah, you have the information, but it still takes practice. And that's what people refer to as integration, right?
Kind of on the cusp of mental health here, I'll say you and I got connected through the mental health world.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say,
we were in therapy together. No, I'm just
maybe not yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we met through the mental health space here in LA. And I think it's so cool. And I just want to, tip of the hat to you I'm so grateful for this connection we have now, for the work that you and I both have committed to our mental health, and talking about it, writing about it, making a podcast about it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for your commitment, our commitment to that aspect of our lives. And now here we are getting to expand on it and hopefully connect with someone watching or listening. And I mean, that is the through line, in my opinion, of the color of everything, and kind of how you were able to come back to center so much when you are quite literally the furthest extremes in the world of center all over, living this grand, amazing life. You're coming back to center now, you're writing about it, you're sharing your experience. And so I just want to acknowledge that work in you. But another aspect is, you kind of hinted, or you said it earlier, about this diagnosis of type 2 bipolar.
Yeah.
How are you navigating that? What is that? And what does that look like in your life now? So
bipolar 2 is distinct from bipolar 1. Bipolar 2 is characterized by, it's so funny, I talk about it so much and sometimes I get confused and I'm like, Jesus, am I saying it right? And bipolar 2 is characterized by spells of hypomania, which is sort of not as amplified as full-blown mania, which can tip into like a psychotic break. In fact, in some ways, it could be even considered psychosis, where your decision-making is so radically impaired by the activity in your mind that you are in some ways offline. This is like full mania is getting engaged after 3 days of knowing somebody, and buying a house or selling a house after
extremely impulsive decision making.
Incredibly impulsive, very dangerous decision making, high risk taking. You're speeding through life, and you're talking fast. People are like, what? It's very, very jarring and
chaotic energy.
Very chaotic, unstructured. It can be violent. It can be completely erratic. I mean, it usually is. Hypomania, which sits below that, which is what bipolar 2 generally experiences, is very high functioning, actually. Like, hypomania is a beautiful place because you can learn languages, you can start businesses, hypomania is actually very enviable, but it's not sustainable. You know what I mean? So it's but it's characterized by really quick thinking, racing thoughts. There's a high level of impulsivity, grandiosity, sort of believing you can do anything, but without taking that final leap into mania. But still, like, that belief that you can do and be anything is intoxicating, and you're certain of it. And so. And then the flip side of that is nearly suicidal or suicidal depression, where you're so crushed, your serotonin, all your, good, healthy, sort of happy hormones and neurotransmitters are radically depleted. You've run them into the ground, and now you're so depressed that you just can't function, right? And you can have rapid cyclers who are just up and down and up and down. You can have long cycles, which can be months at a time. For me, I see that in very sort of longer cycles in my history. Right now, I would say that I'm because I'm more aware of it and can see it and feel it a little bit more acutely, I would say I don't go to the same extremes anymore, because I'm very, very aware, especially of when I'm when I'm cycling up, which means I'm going towards sort of hypomania.
In the sense of like, you're aware of it, therefore you can control it more, or you're just
navigate it.
Okay.
Control is like, I still take medication. I take lamotrigine, and it's speed, at which I'm thinking,
sure,
you're just like, Jesus, it's kind of cracky in a way. And also a diminished need for sleep, lack of appetite, things like that. So I'm very aware of what that looks like. Depression for me is a much harder one to catch because it seems like it's a slower decline. And then all of a sudden 2 months later, I'm like, oh shit. That's what's going on. Like my inability to activate, my inability to, or the trouble I feel activating, my procrastination, my, and what's interesting for me is the bipolar 2 often presents as sort of, my most severe moments with it have been as in mixed episodes, where you're actually experiencing both presentations at the same time. It's very, very jarring.
So you're experiencing those two, but then are you also kind of like, and I'm not trying to offend you. Excuse me. Like, are you also in your own mind? Like, are you
for sure? You're totally in your mind.
So you're present on what's going on, but also aware of these other, not personalities, but like circumstances and things.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can get blinded to that. I've definitely been blinded to that, and certainly, leaving climbing and photography was precipitated by a bipolar 2 mixed episode. Which I didn't see it for what it was in the moment. It took a couple weeks before I was like, oh shit. And that, it's so funny because I always had the language. I knew this journey for since I was 14 years old, but it wasn't until I was like 40 that I really started to see it in its wholeness and see how much it had impacted my life and see looking back and going, oh shit, I think I was in a deep cycle there. Even though I was taking medications for it, it was never really monitored. I'd always been in therapy, but it can be very subtle and it can be very insidious in ways that but again, I think that the whole thing about mental health right now for me is, for a long time, I'm like, well, what is the stigma? We always talk about breaking the stigma and what I started to identify was like the stigma of it is something is fundamentally flawed. Like something's wrong with you. You are broken. And so this whole journey is and again, I acknowledge this is a bit of a catchphrase, but it's like, it's about breaking the story of broken. And it is a story. Neurodivergence, mental health challenges can very much be our greatest strengths if we learn how to navigate them and harness the power that they actually have. I don't like the term mental illness. I think it implies something that can be harmful. I understand illness, but even with things like cancer, you can step back and say, my body is functioning in this way, and as a result, these things are happening, versus I'm sick.
Yeah.
There's very, the words we use are very, very, very powerful.
There's one way to describe your circumstances, and there's another. And one way gives away your power immediately. Right. And another reminds you of how much power you have left.
Yeah. And the third way is just a statement of fact, right? And I would argue that the statement of fact is deeply powerful in that it offers, a future that is not concrete. I am sick.
I love that.
You know what I mean? It's fixed.
I love that.
The statement of fact it's just, these are the things that are happening. Yeah. They can change.
Facts do not mean
they're not
forever.
Immutable. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Unless we're talking about like, is the earth round? Yeah. Okay. The earth is fucking round.
Right. Since when?
Yeah.
If anybody knows how round it is, it's got to be you.
Yeah.
You've seen it from so many different angles and heights and depths, man.
Yeah.
Kind of getting towards the end here, there's another quote that you have in your book from a man who wrote another book that I think is just one of the most profound, but also one of the most technical books on understanding mental health and trauma, and even human physiology. Bessel A. van der Kolk, he wrote this book called "The Body Keeps the Score," and you have this quote in here that I want to round us out with that says, "As long as you keep secrets and suppress information, you are fundamentally at war with yourself. The critical issue is allowing yourself to know what you know. That takes an enormous amount of courage."
Every time I hear that one, I'm like, oh, dude, he nails it. He nails it.
And I think that's such a perfect way to kind of put a bow on our conversation here, man, about gathering information from all angles, from all heights, from all depths, something that you have been such an incredible example of in your career and your life, regardless of the reasons behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, you did it. Your circumstances were your circumstances and you made them your own. You made a career out of it. And now you're kind of coming off that mountain and realizing there is another mountain. And you're doing it from a very heart-centered place now. And for me, I resonate a lot with, because I connect with that kind of same positioning in life and same heart-centered intent. And also, my therapist would laugh because that's exactly where she's trying to get me, in navigating a lot of these circumstances. And so again, just want to credit you in your work and your career and the example you're setting for letting other men, women, people, everyone know that, there is always another mountain, but it's not like, it shouldn't be scary. And if you can figure out the path to the top of the next mountain, or just stay where you are from that heart-centered place, I think you are, to his point, no longer keeping secrets to yourself, and you're using the information of your circumstances to realize how much courage you can have in spite of.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much I can add to that. I think it's, all I would say is that to know what you know does not need to be a judgment. And I think that's what's so scary about it, is so often when we dive into this world of trying to understand ourselves, we're worried that if we speak the truth about ourselves, that somehow makes us flawed or bad. Even if those secrets feel like monsters, they're not. They're just things, and they can all be navigated. And,
yeah, man.
Yeah. So,
well, all of your work, your photography, your social media, the book, The Color of Everything is out now. And the part 2, the kind of edition 2 is also going to be out now. Can you give us a little intro to that? Yeah.
So The Color of Everything is the memoir. It's an internal mining of this. I think a lot of people, even my friends, have been like, I don't want to, float my own boat here, but they're like, I liked this book so much more than I thought I was going to. And they say it with like a lot of love.
You're way smarter than I thought.
Well, it's more that they thought it was going to be this very like sort of, woe is me, look at my story, blah, blah, blah. Or it's just going to be about climbing and bullshit. And it's not that. And it's Alex Honnold, who I gave a, free solo, I gave him an early copy, and he was going to give me a blurb. Well, he did give me a blurb. And he said, Eat, Pray, Love meets Into Thin Air, written by Hunter S. Thompson. So, which I'll take all of them. They're all great books, It's
the backcountry of
pioneering. But this is like the internal exploration. And then the complement to that is the photo book that's coming out. Well, it's out October 15th, or was out October 15th. I don't know when this is going to air.
It'll be out now, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be out now. Okay, and it's called Bipolar. And that is obviously a play on the diagnosis that I carry, which I don't really necessarily identify with, but it was useful because I realized I photographed from the Arctic to Antarctica. And so throughout my career, I had literally photographed, sort of bipolar. Yeah. And that is a complement to this because they're really an ecosystem. It works sort of as, this is the internal exploration and the other is the external exploration that was facilitated by, and they sort of bounce off each other. So if you're reading this and you've got the other book, you can actually flip through and find a photograph that I'm talking about. And
this one has some great photos in it as well.
Yeah, it's got a little insert in there and some cool childhood stuff, but Yeah, they really do work together. They work best together. And yeah, I mean, it's a labor of love, but I hope people will read. I hope people will read this. This one's my baby. I've lived with the photographs for so long that to me, I think, it's great to hold them and look at them and experience them. But to me, The Color of Everything is my baby, and Bipolar is its baby. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
The whole family tree.
It's the family tree.
Family tree, man.
Yeah.
Well, Cory, again, man, it's just been great to get to know you the last couple of months. Congrats on the books. Yeah. And keep climbing, man.
Thanks.
Keep climbing.
Thanks. It's great. Ever forward.
Ever forward, absolutely, man.
Yeah. All right.
Well, beautiful. Let me kill the interview portion there. And my last ask is I'm going to get you to give the camera a little intro clip.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll have you, if we could, let me pull the mug actually like off to the side over here.
Oh, I need
you're going to be on mic, and I'm going to have you look right in this camera. And maybe, let me pull this a little bit closer to you in the shot. Yeah, there we go. So I'll have you just look right in the camera and give me just a brief, hey, I'm Cory Richards, name, title, whatever you want to say, author of Color of Everything. Welcome to Ever Forward Radio, something like that.
Great.
And before you fire away, I just want to get a little behind the scenes of you doing that.
Great.
So you're going to look right here?
Yeah.
Let's just get 2 takes just to happen.
Great.
All you.
What's up, everybody? I'm Cory Richards, author of The Color of Everything and former National Geographic photographer and professional athlete. Welcome to Ever Forward Radio. Hope you guys enjoy the... Fuck.
San Diego, go fuck yourself.
You can do that, yeah. You can use that one. What's up, everybody? I'm Cory Richards, author of The Color of Everything. I'm here on Ever Forward Radio talking about the book, my former life as a National Geographic photographer, former athlete, diving into all things mental health and what it means to always be moving forward.